So last week we were able to add quite a bit of data. Again, seeing the angel of the Lord as somebody who is distinct from the Lord and yet talks like he's God himself. And so we saw that a number of times in the last set of passages. Now we're going to Numbers 22. This is Balaam's donkey, and to get us started, we're going to have to look a little bit more at the background. I just have the section here that we're going to be focusing on the words. But let's go back in chapter 22, if you've got it open there, to get the context a little bit. So Israel is on the move, and chapter 22 is entitled, in those Bibles that have titles, Balak summons Balaam. Balaam's a prophet, Balak's a king, and so just to get the context before we jump into the text itself, somebody want to start with verse 1 of chapter 22?
How far to go?
Well, till we know what's going on here.
Okay. Then the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. Now Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified because there were so many people. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. The Moabites said to the elders of Midian, "This horde is going to lick up everything around us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field." So Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at the time, sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Plethor near the river in the native land. Balak said, "A people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come and put a curse on these people, because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the country. For I know that those you bless are blessed, and those you curse are cursed."
Okay, so that's enough to get us started. So here's the context. The Israelites have made their way up the eastern side of the Dead Sea. They're up across the river from Jericho, which is where they're going to enter the land. They're a large group of people, and what's this analogy as a cattle decimates a field?
I was kind of a plague of locusts myself.
Yeah, it's like a plague of locusts. There's so many people, and they're going to grab whatever resources they need. They're a nomadic people right now. They've been wandering the wilderness, and nomads just live off the resources of whatever land they happen to be inhabiting at the time. So they're just they're worried. There's such a mass of people. So now what Balak does, the king, is he calls for a prophet, Balaam, and he says, "I know God listens to you. And I know when you bless people, they're blessed. When you curse them, they are cursed." So he wants them to go curse the people of Israel. Okay?
So were the Moabites enemies of them? Is that the...
Well, yeah, because they were frightened of them. So now if you jump down to verse 9, God has a conversation with Balaam. And would somebody read verse 12?
God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not put a curse on those people, because they are blessed." Can we keep going?
Yeah, read one more verse.
The next morning Balaam got up and said to Balak's princess, "Go back to your own country, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you."
Okay, so he says, "I'm listening to God." And God is saying, don't go to curse them. Don't go with them. And so he listens. Well, if you keep reading, you'll see that in the next thing, Balak tries to bribe him. I'm going to reward you handsomely, he says in verse 17. And Balaam responds, even you gave me your palace filled with silver and gold. I can't do anything great or small to go against the command of the Lord my God. And notice that he uses the holy name for Lord here, the name Yahweh. So he's using the same name that God revealed himself to Moses at, okay? And then in verse 20, somebody want to read that one for us?
And God came to Balaam at night and said to him, if the men come to call you rise, go with them, but only do what I tell you.
So he says, okay, I can see you're not going to be able to say no, so go with them, but when you go, only do what I tell you to do. So that's the context. King of Moab wants to curse the Israelites, wants them to be hurt in such a way that they can't continue to grow, they can't continue to travel, they can't continue their way to the promised land. And this is where then the text comes up, and the angel of the Lord gets involved. Okay? So, why don't, rather than reading it, well, let's read it all together a little bit. And what we're paying attention to now, so that's the context. We're looking at the major characters, which are going to be Balaam, his donkey, and the angel of the Lord. Primary characters. Obviously, in the introduction, Balak has a good part of that, and but here it's just the angel of the Lord, the donkey, and Balaam. So let's start and read the first. Let's read the first 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. Let's read the first 3 paragraphs. Okay. Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the Moabite officials. But God was very angry when he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Balaam was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand, it turned off the road into a field. Balaam beat it to get it back on the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path through the vineyards, with walls on both sides. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot against it. So he beat the donkey again. So obviously the donkey can see what Balaam can't. Huh?
That's weird.
Well, they always say
God reveals himself to whom he
wishes.
will.
Animals are very strange anyway. They always say they can tell when there's going to be.
That they have another sense.
They got another sense somewhere.
And Balaam is just beating the donkey to get it done, to continue to go. Now let's go through verse 30 now. Okay, verse 30. Let's read that part. Then the angel of the Lord moved on ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no room to turn, either to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and he was angry and beat it with his staff. Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" Balaam answered the donkey, "You have made a fool of me. If only I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now." The donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" "No," he said.
Then
Okay, so now you've got him having a conversation with a donkey. What surprises me is it doesn't say that Balaam was surprised to have this conversation with a donkey. You know?
Oh, we don't know. He might have.
Yeah, we don't know because the Bible doesn't tell us. But it's interesting that he just has this conversation, and the donkey is standing up for himself.
His rights.
I could have been thought, he might have just thought he was hearing things
Well, yeah.
at first.
Well, now we get the revelation to Balaam. So the donkey's been seeing it. First, he turned aside. Secondly, he pushed against the path. That kind of, when I read that passage, I just think about the roads in Ireland and the rocks on either side of the road, and not much room to get by if somebody else is coming the other way. And you don't. Didn't happen to us, but some friends of ours lost 2 mirrors while they were driving in Ireland. Because in passing somebody else coming the other way, they got a little too close to the rock wall. That often is on both sides of the road, so you don't have a lot of room to, it's not like there's a shoulder you can get off on. So he's in that situation where he scrapes his foot, and then he just plain lays down. Says, I'm not going to do any more of that. Okay? Now let's listen to the rest of the story, which is a dialogue between the angel of the Lord and Balaam. So starting verse 31. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his sword down. So he bowed low and fell face down. The angel of the Lord asked him, Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I have come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If it had not turned away, I would certainly have killed you by now, but I would have spared it. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned. I did not realize you were standing in the road to oppose me. Now if you are displeased, I will go back. The angel of the Lord said to Balaam, Go with the men, but speak only what I tell you. So Balaam went with Balak's officials. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at the Moabite road on the Arnon border at the edge of his territory. Balak said to Balaam, Did I not send you an urgent summons? Why didn't you come to me? Am I really not able to reward you? Well, I have come to you now, Balaam replied, but I can't say whatever I please. I must speak only what God puts in my mouth. Then Balaam went with Balak to Kiriath Huzoth. Okay, what is the angel called here? The angel of the Lord. Now it's interesting that it differentiates, if you go back to verse 22, with God and the angel. God is angry, but the angel's the one who's standing in. Now the reason we had to read that context before is when we think about the words of the angel, what does the angel say to Balaam about what he's to do?
Speak only what I put in your mouth.
Heard that before?
Well, that was right in the beginning.
In verse 20. That's why we had to read the context. He finally says, since these men have come, someone go with them, but do only what I tell you. So you've got the angel saying, speak only what I say to you. You've got God saying, do only what I tell you. They're speaking as, the angel once again is speaking as if he's God. And the angel of the Lord then, what does the angel do? The actions? Well, he shows up with a flaming sword. Now, we don't have time to go into all of that, but think about the way that Jesus is pictured in the book of Revelation. He's got a flaming sword. So here he's stopping Balaam. And then when he releases him, says, you can only say what I tell you to say. But what...
Then why didn't he recognize him? If he said, only do what I tell you to do, when he shows up, why didn't Balaam recognize him?
Well...
As the angel, the donkey did. But,
Yep, the donkey did. So that's... this is the way that the nearest I can do this is not in the Bible. But it's the nearest I can do to explain it, that this is the language I use. God lifts the veil so that somebody can see something that other people can't see. When do I see this happening most often in my experience as a pastor? When somebody's getting ready to die. You know, and I probably shared this story with you, but I remember the very first time I had this happen. It was a gal that she hadn't been a member of the congregation in Emmanuel Brookfield, or not Emmanuel Brookfield, Emmanuel Aurora, but my very first congregation. I was probably a pastor about 5 years, and somebody knew her and said she's got cancer, and would you go visit her? So I did. I started visiting her. She was kind of a lapsed Lutheran, so eventually I was giving her communion and visiting with her. And one time I walked in, and as we were talking, she said, "Pastor, I want to tell you something, but I'm a little scared." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, it's something I even told my family because I know they're going to say I'm crazy." And she said, one day, was within the last 3 weeks, she said, I woke up and there was an angel standing at the edge of my bed. And she said, I know if I tell my kids this, they're going to say it's just the medication. But I'll tell you, that angel was there. And we talked. And she said, what do you think about that? And so the nearest I can think of that is that sometimes you can think about Jacob, for instance, so when he wrestled with God, where God lifts the veil and allows him to see what somebody else around there isn't seeing. I've had a number of people who, as they were dying, would say an angel came after that. I've had a number of people who said Jesus came to me. A distinct, and so I've always said in my ministry to people who are dying, when Jesus comes for you, just take him by the hand and go. And I remember one young man, that was at Emmanuel, just a wonderful young man. He had leukemia when he was in 7th and 8th grade, and back then the treatments were not exactly pinpoint precise. They were more like a full-out assault of the body. And what you find is that a number of people who went through treatment at that particular time for that kind of disease, they developed later on, I've heard more often, brain cancer. And so he was one who developed brain cancer, and he was in his right around 40 years old. And gradually, got weaker and weaker, moved in with his parents. I remember he was in their parents' basement. That's where they put a hospital bed for him. And we had visited, and he had been non-responsive for a couple of days. And I'd said to him, I said to his parents, he may see, and I've told people this, they may see that they're talking to either people who have deceased or people that, or see an angel or see Jesus. And don't discount it. And he had been non-responsive for a couple of days. When he died, he sat up in bed, something he hadn't done. He reached out and he said, Jesus, and he fell back and he was gone. I remember Marge Ruprecht talking to me a little bit about her mom. And her mom, as she was going through the dying process, she walked in on her one day and she just kind of waited at the door because she could hear her talking. And she was talking to an empty chair. But as she listened to the conversation, she was able to identify that it was her brother that she was talking to. And they were having a conversation. Now, she couldn't hear the brother, she couldn't see the brother, but her mom was having this conversation with her brother. And, and I remember Marge asked me, said, well, you think he somehow, I said, Mom's close to that time. And in my experience, God will allow sometimes that to happen. So I think of this as just kind of lifting the veil. God can reveal himself to who he wants to reveal in whatever way he wants to reveal himself. And in this case, Balaam saw what, not Balaam, Balaam's donkey saw what Balaam could not. That's what it tells us in the Bible. So, and again, for me, at least in my experience as a pastor, it's most often happened as it was closer to death, where sometimes somebody would have a conversation, they'd see an angel, they'd see Jesus, and none of the rest of us who were in the room could see him, but they'd have that conversation. So the angel, again, acts as God. Now the rest of the story is in chapter 23, where Balak, instead of cursing, actually blesses the people of Israel. He keeps trying to get him, if you read chapter 23 and 24, he keeps trying to get him to curse him. Each time he blesses rather than curses. Because he can only say what the angel of the Lord gives him to say. He can only do what God gives him to do. And so again, you see this identification with the angel and God himself. Okay? Now, let's, any questions about that one?
Do we take that to mean that he wasn't able to say anything else because God would only let him say those things?
Right.
Or because the way it was worded, again, maybe this is just my understanding, he said, only do what I tell you to do. But does that mean you can't do anything else?
Well, whether
he had no free will at that point?
That I don't know.
Okay.
What I do know is that he told Balak, he said, I can only do what God tells me to do. And so it would indicate that he's the kind of prophet who says, I'm not going to mess with God. Whether it was of his own free will or whether it was because God wouldn't allow him. But it seems like he had the opportunity because he's the one who says, I can only do what God tells me to do. It wasn't like he was trying to do something and God had something else come out of his mouth. But he could only do what he had to do. And
Well, it seems to me that,
And if you look at chapter 23 and 24, there are 4 oracles. In other words, there are 4 different times when he speaks. And what we do know is that he's speaking in the name of God. In chapter 24, for instance, before the oracle that begins in verse 3, it says, when Balaam looked out and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the Spirit of God came on him and he uttered his oracle. And you look at verse 5. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Is that what Balak wanted to hear from Balaam? Absolutely not. And if you look at the end of that oracle, he says, may those who bless you be blessed, and may those who curse you be cursed. And Balak's angry. He's angry. But Balak says, I can only say what God gives me to say. Got to be faithful. It's always been my kind of mantra as a pastor too. I can only say what God says. And if he doesn't tell me, he doesn't tell me. And if it's not written in the Bible, I won't say I don't care. But it really doesn't matter. So I got asked this question when I got to church this morning, and the ushers were here. They said, now, which of the blue candles are we supposed to light? I said, I don't have a clue. If there's one you're supposed to light and one you're not supposed to light, I'm sure someplace, somewhere, has some rule about that. But it ain't in the Bible, so...
Do what you want.
Yeah. Just pick a blue one. You know? And because there is way too much of where people say stuff that isn't found in the Bible as if it was authoritative. And, that's So one of the reasons why God always encourages you to test your preachers. Is this really what God says or not? And test yourself. If you make a pronouncement about something that really isn't in God's Word, well, God hasn't given you that to pronounce about. That's what He does give you. And there are warnings in the Bible, both in the end of the Torah and the end of Deuteronomy. It's also, you can find one in Proverbs, and you can find it in the book of Revelation, where it says, don't add to what I've said to you, and don't take away from what I've said to you. Just because you don't like it, you can't say, well, that's doesn't apply to me. And if you think, well, I didn't go far enough, well, tough luck. You know? I haven't given you to say any more than I have said. And that's really kind of the framework in which Balaam is doing his ministry. Yep,
I want
Margie.
to comment on Balaam himself, because I think if he did not have that connection with God in the first place, he was already obviously serving God, and he also had the fear of the Lord, and he had the blessing of the Lord. So within that context, he's not going to deny him. Because you say, well, he could have said anything. Not if he was committed to God. He would not have in the first place. Because he wasn't going to go in the first place, and God gave him permission to go.
Mm-hmm.
So he was willing to listen to whatever God told him. I think because of his connection with God in the first place.
And he's an interesting character because, he kind of comes out of nowhere. He's not a part of the Israelites, but he worships a true God. Kind of like Melchizedek
So
shows
he
up.
wasn't a Jew?
No,
No,
Oh, I didn't know that.
no.
nope. So,
Well, I think there's lots of pockets that were in the Old Testament of peoples that believed in the true God. They just weren't part of the promised group, but they were aware of God as the, we think that a lot of these ancient civilizations like the Indians and Chinese, and the Chinese knew about God because in their ancient language, the figures, you remember that in that one book that was all written.
yeah,
And it has a whole creation story in some of the characters.
in some of the characters.
And now, the Chinese weren't promised people, but they knew of God. The early Chinese people knew of God.
Knew of God
The
because
whole story is in
the story of Genesis is in the characters, the traditional Chinese characters. I can't remember the name of the book, and I don't have it anymore.
I have it, the red with the.
Yeah, it's red. It's got a red cover, red and white color.
And the guy's first name is Gerald or something, but.
Yeah.
Um,
It's an incredibly fascinating read that shows you that in the characters of the Chinese language, the traditional characters, not alphabetical
they've
characters,
updated, because
that the story of creation, the story of the fall into sin, they're all recorded in those characters, which is really incredible. I used to have that book. I probably lent it to somebody and never got it back. But it's a fascinating read.
You lent it to Margie, that's.
No.
No, my dad had that. But the other thing I thought was real interesting, in the Chinese characters, they describe Adam and Eve as having a glow about them, and when they sinned, they lost that glow. So they were clothed in light, according to those characters.
All right, well, let's move on to Joshua 5. So now we got Joshua chapter 5 is where we're at. And this is the crossing of the Jordan. And it begins the fall of Jericho. If you have your Bible open to chapter 5, you will see that just before this, that the Israelites had celebrated the Passover. and now they're getting ready to go into Jericho. So let's see what the angel of the Lord is doing here. Would you read with me through the end of chapter 5? Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now just a couple of observations there. First of all, he's standing and he's got a sword. Not a flaming sword, but he's got a sword. He says he's the commander of the army of the Lord. And in verse 15, what does he tell him to do? Where have you heard those words before? Exodus chapter 3. Who is in the bush? The angel of the Lord. So while it doesn't say angel of the Lord here, you've got the same character saying the same words, only here to Joshua that he did to Moses back at the time of the burning bush. And when Jesus is pictured, especially in the New Testament, how is he pictured? As the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And one of the problems that we have in translating things into English is when it says Lord of Hosts. If you have some English translations, it'll say Lord of Armies. Because the idea is that he's got an army of angels at his disposal. Okay, let's pick up at chapter 6 then and read to the end here. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and everyone will go straight in." Okay, so the context is the fall of Jericho. The major characters here are just this commander of the Lord's army and Joshua. And and what is the commander of the Lord's army? He talks like God again, repeating the same words that he spoke to Moses at Sinai. And then he says, then when he's identified in verse 2, you notice that it's the capital Lord who's speaking. Then the Lord, that's the holy name for Yahweh, says to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands." So it's not just any commander of the Lord. It's not an angel, it's the angel of the Lord. Joshua has to take his orders from him, and he can also know that the armies of heaven are committed to this war. So a little bit less clear than some of the other ones that we've had so far, but still you've got him, the same image that you just had in the book of Numbers, the image of a man with a sword, somebody who then tells Joshua that Jericho is delivered into the hands and gives him the instructions on how to go about doing it.
I think it's interesting that, as you were talking this morning in the sermon, he wins the war without fighting any war, but he always uses a war symbol of a sword.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Well,
for our benefit, so that we get it? Or-
Well, think about what how then the Apostle Paul in his writing talks about the Word. The Word is the
the sword.
sword of the Spirit. When he goes through the panoply of a Roman soldier and he says the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth, the feet shod with sandals to carry peace, and the shield of faith. And I always like to point out that all of those things are defensive weapons. You might not think about the feet as being defensive, but if you've ever seen the traditional Roman sandal that they wore, it had knobs. So think about like football or soccer cleats. They had little knobs that were in the bottom of them so that they had a better chance of being able to withstand, somebody trying to push them back. The only offensive weapon is the Word. The Word. It's the only offensive weapon that Jesus uses. And constantly he returns to calling us back to the Word. So it is his sword. It's his weapon. But again, he doesn't do it by force. He does it by invitation, by calling us to him. Okay? Judges 2. So we get past Joshua to the time of Judges, and we're going to see the angel of the Lord shows up a number of times in the context of the Judges. The first time is in chapter 2. So let's read this section together. It's just a short one. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people leapt aloud, and they called that place Bochim. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. And the word Bochim, if you have a Bible with footnotes, will tell you it means weeping. Okay? Now notice here the angel of the Lord just shows up and he speaks. And he speaks like God. He doesn't say the Lord says, right? There's none of that. I'm telling you what somebody else is saying. He speaks for himself. And when he speaks for himself, he says, I brought you out of Egypt. This takes us back to, was it last week we went through the cloud and the fire? And if you when we tracked all of those passages through the Old Testament and into the New, we see that that cloud is identified with Jesus. And so he says, I brought you up out of Egypt. I led you to the land I swore to give to your ancestors. Well, who did he swear to give that land to? Takes us back to another one of the angel Lord situations, right? It's Abraham at the trees of Mamre. When the angel of the Lord shows up and speaks to Abraham and says, I'm going to make your descendants as many as the sands on the seashore. So he's calling back, recalling all of those kind of things, right? And he says, yet you have disobeyed not the Lord, but you've not disobeyed me. And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. So here it's very clear that the angel of the Lord isn't speaking for God, the Father, or another person in the Trinity, not for another Lord. He's speaking for himself. And he's referring to things that the Lord has already done and said to his people. So here your major characters are just the angel of the Lord speaking to Joshua, and you've got the name he's called the Lord when it says that they offered him sacrifices. What did he do? He brought them out of Egypt. He led them to the land he swore to give to their ancestors, and I break that up into two things. He led them to the land, but he also swore to give this land to his ancestors. He did that when he spoke to Abraham. He said to them that you'll not make a covenant with the people of this land. That was through Moses on Sinai, where he said you're not supposed to mix with people of the land because their gods are going to be a trap for you. And he predicts what's going to happen in the rest of the book of Judges, which is what? 13 times. You have the cycle where, it's best to draw it as a circle, people are faithful and trusting God, and then they become unfaithful. That's the next step. They start worshiping other idols. God lets down the protection. An enemy takes over. They live that way for a little bit. They cry out to God and say, God, help us. God raises a judge. The judge frees the people, and they live in peace until they become disobedient again. 13 times that wheel goes around just in the book of Judges alone. 13 times. And so he's telling them this is what's going to happen to you. Their gods are going to become snares for you. Okay, but very clearly he's talking as if he is God. Okay, can we get one more done? This is Judges chapter 6. This is Gideon. Somebody want to... Well, let's read through verse 16 to start with. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied.
"But how can I save Israel?
"My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Now just notice, it's the angel of the Lord in the first verse. And when he speaks to him, it tells us he sat down under the oak. So he's got a physical presence, just like he did with Abraham, where he came with two other angels and met with Abraham under the trees of Mamre. And he has this conversation with Gideon, but notice how it switches. So now all of a sudden it's not the angel of the Lord talking, but it's the Lord talking. Okay? So in verse 14, the Lord turned to him. In verse 16, the Lord answered. And you notice what the angel says, it's, "I will be with you. I'm sending you." In verse 14, "I will be with you, and you're going to win." Now, Gideon, like Abraham, remember, does not always recognize the presence of God with him, because what does he call him? He calls him Lord, but look at the letters. They're all small case, which means this is the word Adonai. It's more like saying sir. It's a term of respect. It's translated Lord because it is a term of respect, but it's not a recognition that it's not the holy name for God.
In this Bible, it is capitalized.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it all small caps, or is it just,
Capital L, and the rest is lowercase.
if it's lowercase, then it's Adonai. If any part of it's lowercase, then that's Adonai. It's got to be, if it was Lord, it'd be a capital L, but the others would be a small capitals. That's how you can tell. Or it'll be all capitals, depending on how the translator translates it. So he doesn't recognize that this is the Lord who's having this conversation with him. Okay? All right, let's pick up there, verse 17. Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me." Now he's starting to recognize, see? "Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. That must have taken a little while. Okay. The angel of God said to him, now it's back to the angel of God. Angel of Lord, Lord, now it's angel of God that he sets it before. "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. And then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, don't be afraid, you're not going to die." Now notice what happens is if you see the face of God, if you see the face of the angel of the Lord, that's what he's afraid of. But the angel of the Lord is a physical manifestation of the presence of God. And so he says, you're not going to die. So he built an altar to the Lord, and there called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. So the context is they need a judge. God is going to raise Gideon. He's not so sure about his character, so it's just Gideon and the angel of the Lord. But notice what happens to the angel of the Lord. It's angel of the Lord, then it's Lord, 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 then it's angel of God, and then it's angel of the Lord again. So you've got this interchanging between angel of the Lord and Lord, angel of God and Lord. Those are the names that he's called here. Actions of the angel, well, he causes the food to evaporate. I don't know whether it evaporated or what happened to it. It was totally
Thinking of our barbecue.
kaboom, right? Almost sounds like a wizard's wand. Maybe that's where the wizard's wand
Trying to make a barbecue.
idea comes from. I don't know.
He's a bad cook.
He touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff. Fire flared from the rock, and boom, it was gone. Okay? So that's what he did. And that's when finally Gideon realized who he's dealing with. And the words, he says, "I'm sending you. I'm going to be with you. I'll strike down, and you will, with my help, strike down the Midianites." So it's giving Gideon the confidence that he can, even though he's from a very small tribe, even though he's not really equipped to do this, he's going to be able to be one of those judges that rescues God's people in God's way with God's help.
Is there any significance to the difference between the angel of God and the angel of the Lord?
Nope. No, we saw him called the angel of God earlier, that was last week, and then as you went through the other passages that refer to the same event, it was the angel of his presence, he's sometimes called. The angel of God, the angel of the Lord. But again, he's not an angel, he is the angel. So again, in terms of what we're simply doing as we walk through, and this is a great time to do it in Advent, is we're just building the case for what this angel can do, will do, what he does do. He always shows up at significant times to save somebody or to give somebody hope. Right? So he saved Hagar. He saved Ishmael. He gave Jacob hope in the wrestling match that he had with him. He gave Abraham hope when he thought his body was good as dead. He gave Moses hope that he could go into the land of Egypt and rescue the people from. The angel of his presence leads the people through the wilderness to the promised land. And today we heard the angel of the Lord say, I brought you out of Egypt. I have guided you to the promised land. So this is not just any angel. And if he talks like a duck and quacks like a duck, he must be a duck.
Well, and a couple weeks ago when Pastor Poppy had Thursday Bible study, I don't remember exactly how it came up, but I asked him and he said he was going to research it. So now I'm going to put it to you and you can. How come the angel of the Lord came to Joseph, but Mary got Gabriel when they came to give the news? What's the difference? Why did Joseph get the angel of the Lord?
Because guys don't care about names.
Okay, I'll do research, but if I recall right, that's not the angel of the Lord, it's an angel, which is different.
Could have been any old regular.
Right, could have been any old regular angel. But I will look that up.
Joe Snow.
I will look that up. Well, let's close with a word of prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you that you have revealed yourself to human beings throughout history. And as you did, you revealed a little bit more about the character of your Son. And we thank you for how often the angel of the Lord stepped in to give people hope and confidence in their future, to provide freedom from their enemies. And we thank you that same angel has come to live among us. Not sitting under a tree, but rather hanging on a cross for us and for our salvation. And as we celebrate his birth, we ask that you bless us to grasp more fully and deeply the wonderful love and promise he holds for us. We ask it in his name. Amen.
Oh, that's okay. Turn the radio off.
I thought maybe it was like what Jim does once in a while, where he plays the piano or organ while I'm praying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is